Listen, I need you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because while Congress has been consumed with impeachment hearings and special counsel investigations, while the media obsesses over every tweet and every scandal, something far more revealing has been happening right under our noses. And it involves a congresswoman who campaigned on being one of the people, who promised to fight corruption, who positioned herself as the voice of the working class. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to walk you through isn't just about one politician's finances. It's about a pattern so brazen, so systematic, that once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is about how the game really works in Washington. Here's what we know. In 2019, when Ilhan Omar first entered Congress, her financial disclosure form showed a net worth hovering somewhere around $3,000. $3,000. She owed student loans, she had modest savings. She was, by every measurable standard, an average American trying to make it in one of the most expensive cities in the country. That was 5 years ago. Now, here's where this story takes a turn that should make every American sit up and pay attention. Recent reports have surfaced claiming Ilhan Omar's net worth has exploded to somewhere between $3 million and, according to some estimates circulating in conservative media outlets, as high as $30 million. $30 million. Let me say that again so it lands properly. A member of Congress whose salary is $174,000 per year, who entered office essentially broke, is now potentially worth $30 million. Now, I'm no mathematician, but even with extremely generous assumptions about saving and investing, those numbers don't just fail to add up, they exist in a different mathematical universe entirely. Unless something else is happening, and something else is definitely happening. The official response to these $30 million claims, Omar's team has called them completely false and conspiracy theories. They point to her most recent financial disclosure forms, which show a more modest net worth of around $3 million. And yes, $3 million is the more conservative, documented estimate. But here's what's interesting. Even if we completely dismiss the $30 million figure, even if we say that's wildly exaggerated, we're still left with a documented, confirmed $3 million net worth accumulated in just 5 years on a congressional salary. And here's the critical question nobody's asking. If the $30 million figure is so absurdly false, why not simply release comprehensive financial records to settle it once and for all? Full tax returns, complete disclosure of all income sources, documentation of every real estate transaction. If you're being falsely accused of having $30 million, the easiest response is radical transparency. Show us you don't have it. She hasn't done that. Which brings us to the real question. What is she hiding? Before we go any further, let me show you exactly how this story has been systematically buried by the mainstream media, because the details matter enormously here, and you need to understand the context that's been deliberately kept from you. The campaign finance labyrinth. Let's start with the campaigns, because that's where the money trail begins, and that's where the questions start multiplying faster than anyone in Washington wants to answer them. Between 2019 and 2024, Omar's campaign committees have spent approximately $3.7 million on consulting services. Now, consulting is a perfectly legitimate campaign expense. Every politician uses consultants. Media strategists, polling firms, data analysts, the works. Standard stuff. But here's where you need to pay attention. $2.8 million of that $3.7 million went to exactly one firm, a company called E Street Group. You probably haven't heard of them. Most people haven't. They keep a deliberately low profile. But what you absolutely need to know is this. E Street Group was owned by Tim Minett, and Tim Minett, as of 2020, became Ilhan Omar's husband. Do you see what's happening here? Campaign donations. Money given by supporters who believed they were funding a political movement, systematically funneled through a private consulting firm controlled by the candidate's spouse. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented in Federal Election Commission filings that anyone can access. The paper trail is sitting there in public records. It's just that nobody's talking about it. Now, defenders will say, well, they weren't married when the payments started. Technically true. The payments to E Street Group began in 2018. Omar and Minette didn't marry until 2020. But let's be adults about this. The romantic relationship began while both were married to other people. That timeline is well documented. Multiple witnesses confirmed they were involved long before their respective divorces were finalized. So the money was flowing to her future husband's firm while they were conducting an affair. And here's what makes the $30 million question even more relevant. If nearly $3 million flowed just through documented campaign consulting fees, what else are we not seeing? What other income streams exist that aren't captured in campaign finance reports? Where did the other $27 million allegedly come from? If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button right now. The algorithm doesn't care about truth, it cares about engagement. You decide what reaches people. Let's talk about the book. In 2020, Omar published her memoir, This Is What America Looks Like. Now, book deals for politicians are common. Barack Obama got one, Hillary Clinton got one, even Paul Ryan got a book deal. Fine, that's how the game works. What's not common is the reported advance Omar received. According to publishing industry sources, her advance was somewhere in the range of $500,000 to $750,000. For a freshman congresswoman with minimal name recognition outside progressive circles, for a book that, let's be honest, didn't exactly top the bestseller lists for months on end. Let me give you some context. Typical advances for first-time political memoirs from relatively unknown figures run between $50,000 and $150,000. Maybe $200,000 if your agent is really good and the publisher believes you have massive upside. But $500,000 for someone who'd been in office less than 2 years? Here's what makes it more interesting. The publishing house that gave her that deal, HarperCollins, is owned by News Corp, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Now, News Corp and Murdoch are hardly known for their progressive sympathies. So why would they hand a massive advance to a controversial progressive congresswoman? Because it's not about books. It's never about books. Book deals are the most legally elegant way to transfer large sums of money to politicians without triggering bribery statutes. You don't need to prove that anyone read the book. You don't need to prove it sold well. You just need a contract that says advance against future royalties. And suddenly you've got a completely legal mechanism to put hundreds of thousands of dollars in someone's pocket. And here's the kicker. According to publishing industry analysts, Omar's book sold approximately 25,000 copies in its first year, at a retail price of roughly $28, with typical author royalties of 10 to 15%. We're looking at maybe $70,000 to $100,000 in actual earned royalties, meaning she received a massive advance for a book that never came close to earning it back. That's not a bad deal. That's a payoff wrapped in a book jacket. But even if we're generous and say the book deal netted her $750,000 and the campaign payments added another couple million, we're still nowhere close to $30 million. So where's the rest coming from? Now let's talk about speaking fees, because this is where things get truly absurd and where we might start finding some of those missing millions. Members of Congress are allowed to receive speaking fees for appearances at universities, conferences, corporate events, and private gatherings. There are limits, of course. Federal ethics rules cap individual honorariums at $2,000 per event for House members. But here's the loophole large enough to drive a truck through. Those rules don't apply if the payment goes to a charity or nonprofit organization instead of directly to the member. Omar has given hundreds of paid speeches since entering Congress, university campuses, progressive conferences, corporate diversity events, private fundraisers, international forums, and the fees are staggering. According to event organizers and booking agents familiar with her rates, Omar commands between $20,000 and $50,000 per appearance. Some sources suggest her fee for international appearances, particularly in the Middle East and among wealthy progressive donors, can reach as high as $100,000. Let's do some math. If she's averaging, let's be conservative, 2 speeches per month at an average fee of $30,000, that's $60,000 per month. Over 5 years, that's $3.6 million. And that's a conservative estimate, assuming only 2 speeches per month. According to her public schedule, there have been months where she's done 5, 6, sometimes 8 speaking appearances. Now, officially, those payments don't go to her. They go through a speakers bureau, which takes a cut, and then the remainder goes to various nonprofit organizations. But let me tell you what nobody's asking. Who controls those nonprofits? Who sits on their boards? Where does that money ultimately flow? Because here's what we do know. Several of the organizations that receive Omar's speaking fees have direct financial relationships with her campaign apparatus, shared staff, overlapping vendors, office space in the same buildings. It's a financial ecosystem designed to obscure the flow of money while maintaining plausible deniability. And here's something even more interesting. There have been reports of Omar giving private speeches to wealthy donors in the Middle East. No public record, no media coverage, just private jets, luxury venues, and checks written to nonprofit entities that somehow find their way back into her financial orbit. Could speaking fees, routed through carefully constructed nonprofit networks, account for tens of millions of dollars? Absolutely. Would those payments show up on congressional financial disclosure forms? Not if they're structured correctly. Not if the money flows through the right intermediaries. This is where the $30 million figure starts to seem less like conspiracy and more like plausible reality. And before you say, well, that's just how politics works, ask yourself this. When did we collectively decide that was acceptable? When did we agree that elected officials could construct elaborate financial networks specifically designed to enrich themselves while technically complying with the letter of ethics rules? If you're still watching, drop a comment below. Do you think the $30 million figure is real? Or is the documented $3 million damning enough? I genuinely want to know what you're thinking. Let's move to real estate, because this is where the numbers become truly impossible to ignore, and where we might find another piece of the wealth puzzle. In 2020, Omar purchased a home in Minneapolis for $800,000. Not unusual for a member of Congress. They need to maintain residences in their districts, fine. But here's the thing. Her congressional salary is $174,000 per year. After taxes, she's taking home maybe $120,000. Subtract living expenses in one of the most expensive cities in America, and you're left with very little for an $800,000 home purchase. But somehow, she made it happen. And then, just 2 years later, in 2022, she purchased a second property. This one valued at approximately $1.1 million. 2 homes, combined value just under $2 million on a congressional salary. Now, I know what the defenders will say. She got mortgages. That's how home buying works. Fair enough. Let's talk about mortgages. To qualify for loans on properties worth nearly $2 million, you need to demonstrate substantial income and assets beyond your salary. Banks want to see reserves. They want down payments, typically 20% minimum for investment properties. That's $160,000 for the first house, $220,000 for the second. That's $380,000 in down payments alone. Where did that money come from? The campaign payments to her husband's firm? The book advance? The speaking fees funneled through nonprofits? All of the above? But here's where it gets interesting, and here's where the $30 million question becomes more credible. According to property investment analysts who've examined public real estate records, these aren't Omar's only property holdings. There are reports of additional real estate investments held through limited liability companies and trusts, properties in Minnesota, properties in Washington, D.C., potentially properties in other states. And here's the detail that hasn't been widely reported. According to county property records, both confirmed homes were purchased through limited liability companies, not in her name directly, through corporate entities that obscure ownership and make tracking the actual source of funds nearly impossible. That's not how normal people buy homes. That's how people buy homes when they don't want anyone to know where the money came from. And that's how people build real estate portfolios worth tens of millions of dollars while maintaining public claims of modest wealth. Real estate is the oldest wealth hiding strategy in the book. Buy properties through LLCs, put them in family trusts, use mortgage debt to obscure equity. And suddenly you can have tens of millions in assets while your public financial disclosures show far less. Could Omar have a real estate portfolio worth $20 million or more? Based on what we can see in public records, it's entirely possible. Based on the corporate structure she's using, it's exactly what someone would do if they wanted to hide substantial wealth. Here's something else that's been conspicuously absent from the conversation: investment portfolios. Financial disclosure forms for members of Congress are notoriously vague when it comes to investments. They're allowed to report holdings in broad ranges rather than specific amounts. They can bundle certain investments together. They can use categories that obscure the actual value of their holdings. According to what's publicly available, Omar reports various stock holdings, mutual funds, and retirement accounts. But the disclosure forms only require ranges: $1,000 to $15,000, $15,001 to $50,000, $50,001 to $100,000, and so on. The highest category is simply over $1 million. If you're clever, and if you have sophisticated financial advisors, you can structure an investment portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars while only reporting ranges that make it appear far more modest. Have there been any reports of Omar having access to sophisticated hedge funds, private equity positions, venture capital investments, international holdings? Not in her public disclosures. But that doesn't mean they don't exist. It means they're structured in ways that don't require disclosure, or they're held through entities that create separation between her name and the assets. This is how the wealthy stay wealthy while claiming to be working-class heroes. This is how politicians accumulate massive fortunes while campaigning on economic equality. Could strategic investments account for another $10 to $15 million in net worth? Absolutely, especially if you have inside information, which members of Congress regularly do. Especially if you know which industries are about to receive government funding, which regulations are about to change, which international agreements are about to be signed. Members of Congress are legally allowed to trade stocks based on information they learn in classified briefings and committee hearings. They're allowed to invest in companies that will benefit from legislation they're voting on. As long as they report it within 45 days, it's completely legal. The Stock Act of 2012 was supposed to stop this. It didn't. Studies show that members of Congress consistently outperformed the market, beating professional hedge fund managers year after year. That's not skill, that's information asymmetry. That's legalized insider trading. Could Ilhan Omar have turned privileged information into massive investment returns? Could she have $10 million, $15 million, $20 million sitting in strategically structured investment accounts? We don't know, because she won't tell us. And the disclosure requirements don't force her to. Now I have to address something that's been circulating for years, something that local Minnesota reporters have whispered about, but national media won't touch: the allegations surrounding Omar's immigration history and her first marriage. According to documents reviewed by conservative outlets and some local investigative reporters, there are serious questions about whether Omar's first marriage to Ahmed Hersi was legally valid, whether her second marriage to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi involved immigration fraud, and whether tax documents filed during that period contain false information. Look, I'm not here to convict anyone in the court of public opinion, but I am here to point out that when these allegations first surfaced in 2019, Omar's response was to call them disgusting lies and refused to provide documentation that would definitively settle the questions: birth certificates, marriage licenses, immigration records. All of it could be released tomorrow if she chose to do so. She hasn't. Why not? If the allegations are completely baseless, why not just release the documents and obliterate the accusations once and for all? The reason I bring this up in the context of her wealth accumulation is simple. Financial irregularities and immigration fraud often go hand in hand. If someone is willing to falsify immigration documents, if someone is willing to commit marriage fraud, if someone is willing to file false tax returns, then funneling campaign money through a spouse's consulting firm is hardly a bridge too far. And here's where it ties to the $30 million question. If there were immigration fraud, if there were false tax filings, if there were undisclosed income streams from overseas during those years, they wouldn't show up in current financial disclosures. They'd be buried in the past, hidden in old bank accounts, laundered through family members, converted into assets that don't require reporting. I'm not saying these things are connected. I'm saying nobody in power is asking whether they're connected. And that silence is deafening. Let's talk about something that's been completely ignored by mainstream coverage: Omar's international profile and potential foreign income sources. Since entering Congress, Omar has become a prominent figure in international progressive circles, particularly in the Middle East and among Muslim-majority nations. She's been invited to speak at events in Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, and other countries. She's met with foreign leaders. She's been featured prominently in international media. Now, here's what's interesting about international speaking fees and consulting arrangements. They're much harder to track than domestic income. If a foreign organization pays a U.S. nonprofit that then pays Omar's speaking bureau, does that show up in her financial disclosures? Maybe. Maybe not. It depends entirely on how the transaction is structured. There have been persistent reports, unverified but persistent, that Omar has received substantial payments from organizations with ties to foreign governments: six-figure speaking fees, consulting arrangements, advisory positions that require minimal work but come with substantial compensation. Are these reports true? I don't know. But I know this: if they were true, and if the payments were structured through intermediaries, they wouldn't necessarily appear anywhere in publicly available records, and they could easily account for millions of dollars in additional wealth. The same congressional disclosure rules that allow vagueness about domestic investments become even more permissive when it comes to foreign income, especially when that income is routed through domestic nonprofit entities or classified as charitable work. Could foreign income streams account for $5 million, $10 million, $15 million in hidden wealth? Absolutely. Would we know about it from her financial disclosures? Not if the money moved through the right channels. The denial and the absence of proof. Now let's get back to the central question. Is Ilhan Omar worth $30 million, $3 million, or something in between? Her team says $30 million is absurd. They point to her official disclosure showing around $3 million. And yes, based on what's publicly documented, $3 million is the defensible number. But here's my question. If the $30 million figure is so outrageously false, why not prove it? Release full tax returns for every year since entering Congress. Provide complete documentation of all real estate holdings, including those held through LLCs. Disclose the full details of every speaking arrangement, including the nonprofits that received the payments and how those funds were subsequently used. Show us the investment portfolios. Show us the bank statements. Show us everything. Because here's what I believe. I believe the truth is somewhere between the two numbers. I believe the documented $3 million is artificially low because of the ways wealthy people structure their assets to minimize apparent net worth. And I believe the $30 million figure, while possibly exaggerated, is closer to reality than her team wants to admit. Maybe it's not $30 million. Maybe it's $15 million. Maybe it's $20 million. But I guarantee you it's more than $3 million. And I guarantee you the additional wealth is hidden in structures specifically designed to avoid disclosure. Here's what's truly remarkable about this entire story. It's been hiding in plain sight for years. Federal Election Commission filings are public. Property records are public. Publishing industry data is available. Yet somehow the major networks, the cable news channels, the newspapers that claim to hold power accountable have barely touched it. When conservatives raise these questions, they're dismissed as racist. When investigative reporters try to follow the money, they're accused of targeting a Muslim woman. The accusations of bias and bigotry fly so fast that the actual financial questions get buried under the noise. But let me ask you this. If a Republican congresswoman had funneled $2.8 million in campaign funds to her husband's consulting firm, do you think the media would stay silent? If a conservative politician had received a $500,000 book advance for a memoir that barely sold, do you think the Washington Post would ignore it? If a right-wing representative had purchased $2 million in real estate on a congressional salary while refusing to answer questions about the source of the funds, do you think CNN would give them a pass? And if claims surfaced that a Republican was actually worth $30 million despite entering Congress broke, do you think there wouldn't be 24/7 coverage demanding full financial transparency? Of course not. The double standard is so obvious it's almost insulting. This isn't about left versus right. This isn't about Democrat versus Republican. This is about whether we still believe that elected officials, regardless of party, regardless of identity, regardless of political ideology, should be held to the same standards of financial transparency and ethical conduct. Right now, the answer appears to be no, and that should terrify you. So where does this go from here? What happens when someone finally starts asking the questions that matter? Because here's the thing about financial investigations. Once they start, they don't stop easily. The IRS doesn't care about your political ideology. The Federal Election Commission doesn't care about your progressive credentials. The Department of Justice doesn't care how many times you've been called a champion of the people. They care about numbers. They care about documentation. They care about whether the money trail adds up. And in Omar's case, the money trail absolutely does not add up. Whether it's $3 million or $30 million, the trajectory from broke to multimillionaire in 5 years on a congressional salary, with all the intermediary transactions we've documented, demands investigation. At some point, someone with subpoena power is going to start pulling threads. And when they do, one of two things happens. Either there are perfectly reasonable explanations for all of it, explanations that Omar has inexplicably refused to provide for years, or there aren't. And if there aren't, if this is what it appears to be, a systematic scheme to enrich herself using campaign funds, political influence, and carefully structured financial networks, then we're not talking about ethics violations. We're talking about federal crimes. Campaign finance fraud, tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering. These aren't abstract concepts. These are statutes with real penalties, and they apply to everyone, including members of Congress. The question is whether anyone in Washington has the courage to pursue it. But let me be clear about something. I don't care about Ilhan Omar's race. I don't care about her religion. I don't care about her gender. I care about her finances. I care about the millions of dollars that appeared in her accounts seemingly out of nowhere. I care about the campaign funds that flowed to her husband's firm. I care about the book deals and the speaking fees and the real estate purchases that don't add up. And I care about the refusal to provide documentation that would settle the $30 million question once and for all. If those same numbers appeared in a Republican's financial disclosures, I'd be asking the same questions. If a conservative politician had funneled millions to their spouse's company while building a mysterious real estate empire and refusing to explain where the money came from, I'd be demanding the same answers. This isn't personal. This is accountability. And in Washington, accountability has become the rarest commodity of all. The facts are simple. Ilhan Omar entered Congress essentially broke. 5 years later, she's officially worth $3 million, with credible claims suggesting the real number is closer to $30 million. The explanations she's offered don't explain either figure. The financial records raise more questions than they answer, and nobody in power seems interested in investigating. That's not justice. That's not transparency. That's not accountability. That's a system designed to protect itself, no matter the cost to the people it claims to serve. The question now is whether we're going to accept it, whether we're going to shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's just how politics works, or whether we're going to demand better, whether we're going to insist that elected officials, all of them, regardless of party, live by the same rules they impose on the rest of us. I know what I'm choosing. The question is, what are you choosing? Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, share this video, and stay tuned because this story is far from over. Whether it's $3 million or $30 million, the truth is going to come out. When the next chapter unfolds, and it will, you'll want to be here. I'll see you in the next investigation.